Hi, my name's Josh. Welcome to the library at Hermit Street. This week is going to be uh, a downer. um, we're going to be discussing Sam Keith just passed yesterday at time of recording. Um, Sam Keith is the graphic novelist and artist best known for the Max through Image Comics. Um, Also a notable contributor to the old Marvel Comics Presents comics, which is the stuff I have on hand to talk about. Um, Worked on Batman, worked on is arguably the only reason you should ever crack open a copy of Sandman at this point. Um, the Vertigo comic, The Sandman. He did the art for the first couple few issues. Really set the visual tone for that series, which has since we won't talk about the author of that comic. Um, Trigger warning. Because I'm going to be discussing the Max. The Max deals with themes of sexual assault and trauma. Um, it deals with them incredibly humanely, but it's a subject of discussion, and I uh, just giving you a content warning that that is going to come up. So let's start with the Max. Um, for those of you not aware, in the early 90s, a bunch of independent comic creators broke away from the big two companies, Marvel and DC. May have heard of them. A bunch of their top artists broke away and formed their own company with creator rights and ownership of their own content. Uh, that is Image Comics. They are still going strong today. They are arguably, you know, what was a big two is now a big three. And the early 90s Image Comics were very much what you think of as 90s comics. Spawn, Youngblood, Savage Dragon, Shadowhawk, uh, Wildcats. Very big guns, pouches. Hey, we don't have to worry about the comic code, so we can get away with ultra violence. Like I said, very very much what you think of if you think of cliched, 90s comics of a certain stripe, 90s superhero comics. And then there was the Max. Sam Keith had done work on, I think probably his biggest work at the time, besides Sandman, was he did a lot of covers for Marvel Comics Presents, which was Marvel's kind of a series I always wish they would bring back, because it was a anthology series that they used to kind of showcase up and coming talent, or sometimes just burn off uh finished comics that they had in the hopper. Um but Sam Keith, and this is the thing, this is the Sam Keith material I think I have the most of. Sam Keith did a lot of covers for Marvel Comics Presents, and I think most notably he did a famous story of Wolverine fighting a character who I shouldn't like as much as I do, um, because he's very thin character on the ground. I'm seeing what else I have. he, written by Peter David, which I always kind of forget. Peter David and Sam Keith telling the story Blood Hunt. And again, this was 1991, so everything kind of had that kind of cheesy post 80s action movie vibe to it. But Keith and David did a story about Wolverine, uh, told over multiple parts. Wolverine running into a guy that Wolverine is actually afraid of. And when you're a kid, that's a amazing hook for a character. It's like, oh, this is the guy. Like, Wolverine's the best there is at what he does, and what he does isn't very nice. But and say if he runs into Sabretooth, he just gets angry. He's just like, Sabretooth, you egg sucking piece of gutter trash, I'll kill you. Cyber is the guy he's like afraid of, and Cyber is essentially, Wolverine has an adamantium skeleton. Cyber has adamantium skin, which makes no sense, 0 sense. He has a little fingertip claws that pump you full of like super hallucinogens. Um, and he's just like he's built like a brick shit house. Wolverine's 5'4", I think, canonically. Cyber is built like Brock Lesnar. Um, and you can see here, like, yeah, that's Wolverine versus Cyber. You see, just these. So this, I think, was like the first I had really heard of. Well, no, I tell a lie. I knew of Sam Keith from the Max, but I think the Marvel Comics Presents Blood Hunt was more accessible. And it's like something I hope to convey about Sam Keith's work is that it had this, grittiness, this, like, you just look at the way he draws tatters of clothes and every little hair on Wolverine's arm, but then also the exaggerated, like, even by the standards of the 90s, just like exaggerated, almost grotesque physicality of his figures. And there are artists in the 90s who drew that way because it was the style. There are artists who drew that way because they had, um, we'll call them deficits in technical chops. I think that's a polite way to say it. Um, Sam Keith drew like nobody else. Like nobody draws like Sam Keith. Nobody. He never had. I can't really think of anybody who like imitated him because it was nigh impossible. Um, Nobody before or since just had that, like, there was an element of, I think, kind of classical fantasy art, um, like Frank Frazetta vibes to some extent. But whereas Frazetta was like a technical master of anatomy, Sam Keith just drew like an explosion of imagination and exaggeration. There's a cartooniness melded with just being able to draw his ass off. Um, and he was good at these kind of hulking, grotesque dudes, and then these very you know like that is a excellent kind of representation of like especially Keith's kind of more Frazetta-y inclinations where it's like beautiful women hulking, cartoonishly ballooned goober men. Um, and Blood Hunt also Blood Hunt has like for the most part it starts off as like kind of a film noir Wolverine and Cyber playing cat and mouse through Madripoor. Uh, then it becomes a just a brawl, and once Wolverine gets dosed with hallucinogens, it becomes. I'm trying to see if I can find some of these. Oh, that's such a good sequence. Hold on. Like weird surrealist Americana uh Freudian imagery in Wolverine's hallucinations. And then also the bit I was looking at where I'm like, "Oh, that's so good." There's no like this is Cyber and Tiger, who's one of the crime bosses of Madripoor, just like throwing paper airplanes of offers and counter offers for like Tiger's trying to hire Cyber, and Cyber's like shooting counter offers, and eventually wads it up and throws it through a glass window, um, because he's very strong. So maybe my TLDR. Sam Keith kind of made his bones with this amazing Wolverine story. Then the '90s got into full swing, and the Max debuted at Image Comics. Like Spawn was the flagship title. Wildcats. Jim Lee was coming off of X-Men, and was like that was the biggest. Todd McFarlane on Spider-Man and Jim Lee on X-Men were like the biggest selling comics of the '90s. And then they went and did their own thing. Todd's was Spawn. Jim Lee's was Wildcats, which I have a fondness for, but like it wasn't like Spawn's still around. Wildcats, yeah, kind of. Um, but you had all these like big flashy, populist comics. Unfettered superhero comics by the top artists in the industry. And then you had the Max, and the Max on the like at a superficial glance, you could look at the Max and be like, oh, this is a like he's kind of like a gritty street vigilante type, right? Um, but they're not really. Uh, so the Max is about a homeless, unhoused individual. Uh, the Max, and he has a social worker that he's in contact with. Um, and like the Max's internal monologue is all these like gritty Batman style like the city blah 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 blah. Um, and he has a social worker Julie who's a knockout and he fights an evil wizard named Mr. Gone, who's one of the most terrifying characters I think I've ever run across in a comic. Um, there's all these superficial things of like, oh, this is like a grittier version of like a Batman or a Daredevil street level superhero thing. And what the comic unfurls out to be is that it is an exploration and an exorcism of sorts of a shared of a history of family sexual assault and trauma, and the letter pages at the time were just full of people, teens, 20s, writing in and just saying like, oh, having a comic that's talking about this stuff, um, just to help them not feel alone with it, because that is, to this day, sexual trauma is an incredibly isolating. Uh, all trauma is isolating. No one's uh, what is trauma if not locking us in within our own heads with horrible things that have happened to us. But that trauma, being assaulted by a family member is especially isolating for a lot of people. And the way the comic, uh, dealt with that, and talked about cycles of abuse, and talked about, enacted this kind of grand surrealist psychodrama that is all just about finding and making some semblance of peace with yourself, and just everybody in that cycle just kind of finding ways to break the cycle and find some kind of peace. Uh, for that comic to come out of Guns and Pouches and the Cool Kid Comic Company, was like that comic would be nothing short of remarkable no matter where it came out from. But for that comic to come out from that company, um, is somewhat of a miracle. Um, and naturally, the Max is incredibly out of print. Um, if you get a chance, it is, I would argue, one of the hidden gems and secret pillars of American comics. It got a cartoon at one point, of all things. Uh, and I think for a lot of people that's what they remember the Max from, is that it was an early MTV animation. Um, but the comic is such a singular and personal and raw and heartbreaking piece of work. Um, like every if it's one of the, like, to read a Sam Keith comic is to kind of fall in love with Sam Keith comics. Despite that content, there's just such a raw beating heart and such a visible joy of drawing Yeah, like Sam Keith drew like there's certain artists we talk about having like a kineticism, um, and sometimes in terms of craft, and sometimes in terms of like there are a few mediums I can think of besides outside of comics where you can visibly see somebody's where it feels like somebody's dreaming on paper in real like they're just drawing straight from the realm of pure imagination. And Jack Kirby was one of them. Taya Matsumoto is another artist I think of with that kind of raw, uh, unfettered imagination mainlining to the page, and Sam Keith. Um, so this has been rambling, and I know, and I kind of got hung up on the superhero slap fight comics instead of arguably the man's magnum opus. Um, but all of which is to say, Sam Keith was an incredible artist, um, and we are poor for his loss. Like as you know, in the comics medium and just in the realm of the arts, the pure arts, we are poor for not having Sam Keith with us anymore. Um, like I said at the top of the episode, this wasn't going to be a particularly happy episode, but thank you for letting me talk about Sam Keith. Um, if find some of his work if you can, and uh, do yourself the pleasure of introducing yourself to Sam Keith's work if you're not familiar with it. Um, and as always, thank you for joining me. And hopefully next time I will have happier subject matter to talk about. Um, but even though I don't have a ton of Keith's work, that is a artist whose passing I needed to acknowledge at length. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to do so.